The wind carried the bite of snow even before Naomi Whitlock stepped down from the stagecoach. Her boots struck the frozen ground with a dull thud, breath already curling in soft white puffs as she looked around the tiny outpost that would serve as her beginning. The town of Winter Hollow, nestled in the folds of a high valley, was quiet save for the creak of signboards and the crunch of sleet under hooves and boots. A station house, a general store, and a chapel, those were the first things she saw. The rest was swallowed by the hush of falling snow and the steady gray of a sky that had forgotten sunlight. She gathered her shawl tighter and looked behind her, where the coach door remained open as if inviting her to change her mind. But she had made her choice miles ago, when she'd sold her father's piano for passage, packed her mother's silver comb, and tucked the letter from Henry Calder into her bodice. I have land. I built a home for two. Come before winter sets in. I need you, he had written. And she believed him. The driver, a bearded man with a crooked nose, grunted as he unloaded her trunk. Someone as posed to meet you? He asked without real interest. Yes, she said. Henry Calder. The name drew a glance from the shopkeeper sweeping snow off the store's porch. He looked at her a moment longer than necessary, then went back to sweeping. Naomi felt the weight of that look, the kind that said more than it ought to. Minutes passed. No one came. The station master stepped out, his coat patched at the elbows. You Miss Whitlock? I am. He scratched the back of his neck. Mr. Calder sent word a few days back. Said something about his horse going lame. Asked us to let you know he'd be along before sundown. You're welcome to wait inside. She nodded and stepped into the station, where a fire burned low in the hearth and the scent of tobacco lingered in the air. She sat on a wooden bench, her gloved hands folded in her lap, and stared at the flames. Outside, snow fell like sifted flour, quiet and continuous, the kind that settled into the bones of the land. The sun dipped low before a wagon finally appeared, its silhouette slow-moving and unimpressive. The man who climbed down wasn't what she had imagined. Henry Calder was leaner, harder in the face, with eyes that didn't match the warmth of his letters. He looked at her like she was something he didn't quite remember ordering. You made good time, he said flatly, then took up her trunk without another word. Naomi followed, unsettled. Still, she told herself it was the cold that made him distant. Men weren't meant for letters, not really. It was action that mattered, providing, building, enduring. The wagon ride was silent, broken only by the rhythm of hooves and the occasional snap of reins. The snow deepened around them, blanketing pine and path alike. Naomi tried not to shiver. She watched Henry's back, his shoulders tense beneath his coat, and reminded herself of her purpose. She was here to build a life, to be a wife, to belong. The cabin came into view an hour later, a squat log structure, smoke curling from the chimney. It was smaller than she expected, its yard bare, its fence unfinished. But it was shelter. He helped her down, then opened the door with a grunt. Inside, warmth met her face, welcome and soft. The fire glowed. A stew simmered on the stove. But no table was set, and no extra chair waited for her. Only a single cot and shelves lined with tools and old whiskey bottles. There were no signs of anticipation, no evidence of preparation. He set her trunk down hard and rolled his shoulders. You'll sleep by the stove for now. Till we figure things out. Naomi blinked. I thought we were to be wed. He didn't answer right away. Just poured himself a drink and downed it in one swallow. Then another. I said I needed help for the winter. Didn't say anything about rushing to the preacher. His tone was sharp now, defensive. You came of your own accord. The words sliced the air. She stood motionless as he drank again, then tossed the empty tin into the sink. Look, he added, less harsh. You stay warm, you pull your weight and we'll see where things go. Naomi lowered herself onto the stool by the fire, fingers trembling under her gloves. Her heart beat loud in her chest, not with fear but with the hollow throb of disappointment. She had come west with hope wrapped tightly around her ribs. But it had come undone in a single conversation. Days passed in slow, colorless rhythm. Henry left at dawn to chop wood or check trap. He rarely spoke beyond short commands: pass the salt, fetch more kindling. At night, he drank. Not to rage, not even to forget, just to vanish quietly inside himself. Naomi kept busy in silence, scrubbing floors, boiling linens, cleaning away layers of grime that had grown thick in corners. She cooked, and he ate. That was the extent of their life. Once, she asked if she could hang her mother's comb by the window, just for light. He said no. By the second week, snow had buried the fence posts, and Naomi had ceased asking questions. One morning, she rose before the fire and found a note on the counter. Gone trapping. Be back in 3 days. Feed the mare. He was gone longer than 3. Naomi chopped her own wood, fed the animals, and waited. Each night she lit the lantern, just in case he returned. Each morning, she found only silence. On the 4th day, she walked the half-mile to the river to break ice for water. She slipped twice, hands scraped raw against bark and stone. Her coat was too thin. When Henry returned, he said nothing of his absence, only commented that her stew had too much onion. That night she cried quietly beneath her shawl, the fire casting her shadow large against the wall. It wasn't the loneliness that broke her. She had known loneliness before. It was the betrayal, the great, yawning lie of it all. The letter had spoken of a partner. Instead, she had been folded into someone's survival plan like another shovel or mule. But she did not leave. She wrote no letters back east. There was no one left to receive them anyway. Instead, she began marking days on the inside of her trunk lid, carving them with the blade she kept hidden under her pillow. Not out of malice, just to keep the days from slipping away unnoticed. And then came the Sunday when it all changed. The snow had lightened into flurries that morning. Naomi ventured outside to shake out the rugs and fetch a pail of water. When she returned to the cabin door, she found it ajar. Her heart quickened. Inside, Henry stood by the hearth, talking low to someone she couldn't see. Then the stranger stepped into view. He was younger than Henry by some years, broad in the shoulders and dressed in worn but clean buckskin. His eyes, unsettling in their steadiness, landed on her and didn't flinch. He nodded, not like a man introducing himself to a hostess, but like a scout greeting another traveler. "This her?" he asked. Henry grunted. "She'll do." Naomi's blood turned to ice. "Do?" she asked quietly, but no one answered. The stranger smirked faintly. "She's prettier than you said." Henry snorted and picked up his coat. "I'm going into town. You two get acquainted." The door slammed behind him. The stranger stepped closer, but not threateningly. Just close enough to speak in a low voice. "I don't know what he told you, ma'am. But I reckon it wasn't the truth." Naomi swallowed. "And you are?" "Someone who's seen too many women dragged west to be used up and left behind." He looked toward the snow-paned window. "But I also know something else. Some fires don't die, even when you try to smother them." She stared at him, unsure what to make of the words, or the man who spoke them like he wasn't afraid of being heard. The silence that followed felt different, fuller somehow. That night, Naomi marked another line in her trunk. This time, the line was deeper and straighter. She didn't know what came next. But something in her bones whispered it wouldn't be more of the same. Not anymore. The morning Henry didn't return, Naomi waited. She stirred the embers, swept the corners, made stew from the last of the potatoes. Snow fell thick and steady, muffling the world in white silence. Hours passed. By nightfall, the wind howled like a wounded thing against the walls, and she bolted the door. By the second day, she went out to the shed and found the mare gone. There was no note. She knew then. He had left her. Not in anger or heat, not with a fight or even a slammed door. Just gone. As if she'd never mattered. As if she'd been a mistake he could walk away from. The man who once wrote her letters about planting apple trees had vanished into the winter like a shadow receding at dawn. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, breath fogging the air, fingers curled around the post for balance. The snow was too deep now to leave. The nearest town was miles away, the path unmarked. Even if she made it to Winter Hollow, what would she say? That she'd come west with dreams, and had been abandoned in a one-room shack before the spring thaw? They'd whisper. She could feel it already. She was the woman who came for a husband and got left like a sack of grain on the porch. Naomi stayed. In the mornings, she built the fire with numb fingers and boiled snow for tea. She stitched the fraying seams of her coat, humming quietly to fill the quiet. There was no longer a reason to cook for two, but she did anyway, old habits feeding old hope. She could have packed what she could carry and waited for the first wagon to pass through. But something in her rebelled against that image of herself, huddled and pitiful, asking to be taken somewhere else. No. She would not run. She began chopping wood herself. The axe was dull, the blade stubborn. Her palms blistered, but she kept at it until the logs piled high. When the stewpot emptied, she learned to trap. Rabbits first, then game birds with snares and patience. She laid salt by the door to keep wolves away, and hammered a piece of Henry's whiskey flask flat to patch the hole in the roof. She wore her shawl like armor, each fold a vow not to disappear. By the second week, her muscles ached but moved with purpose. Her breath still caught from the cold, but her hands no longer trembled. She spoke to herself sometimes, not from madness but to hear something human. The whispers began when she rode into town on Henry's borrowed sled, dragging furs and pies to trade. She stood straight-backed in the general store, her eyes level, her voice firm. Behind her, women murmured. She heard the words, abandoned, foolish, Calder's mistake. They thought she couldn't hear, but she did. She didn't flinch. Naomi sold a pie for 50 cents and bought fabric scrap. She traded rabbit pelts for a sack of flour. She said thank you to the shopkeep and walked out with her head unbowed. She returned the following week, and the one after. Each time, the murmurs followed. But some eyes softened. The preacher's wife once slipped her a handful of dried herbs with no explanation. An old man with one eye offered her a better rate for cornmeal. A child gave her a button carved from bone. The town didn't embrace her, but it watched her differently now. Warily, perhaps, but no longer with pure dismissal. One Sunday, she brought 3 hand-sewn kerchiefs to trade. Her stitching was precise, the borders neat. She laid them out at the edge of the trading table near the chapel, beneath a crooked sign that read "Bring what you have. Take what you need." A man approached, wide-shouldered, with hands roughened by labor. His hat was low over his brow, but his eyes found hers with gentle focus. He studied the stitching. "Your work." She nodded, uncertain. "Fine detail." He lifted one. "You trade for this? Flour. Or onions?" He smiled faintly. "Don't need onions. But I have thread, if you're low." "I am." He reached into his coat and handed her a roll of black thread. "Take it then." She stared at it. "No trade. Just thread," he said. "Can't eat it. Might as well use it." She took it carefully, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." He tipped his hat and walked off. Later, someone told her his name, Matthew Quinn. A rancher's son. Lived alone out near Elk Creek. Kept to himself, mostly. Never took a wife. Naomi didn't expect to see him again. But 2 weeks later, as she hitched her sled outside the store, he appeared beside her without warning. "I've a kettle with a dent in it," he said plainly. "You any good with hammer work?" "Some." "I'll bring it to you." That was all. He came the next day, just as he said, riding a chestnut gelding with a steady gait. He handed her the kettle without stepping inside. "Not urgent," he said. "If it's fixable, I'll bring eggs next time I'm through." She nodded. "I'll do my best." He rode off without further word, but he returned again 2 days later with 6 eggs wrapped in straw. And he kept coming. Sometimes with eggs, sometimes with books wrapped in burlap, worn novels with spines cracked from reading. Once, he brought her a bar of soap carved with her initials. They didn't speak much. When they did, the words felt unhurried, like rocks placed carefully in a streambed. Naomi began to wait for his visits in a way she didn't admit, even to herself. She mended his shirts once. He left them in a basket without asking, a quiet invitation she accepted with pride. She stitched the tears with careful hands and left them folded by the door. He didn't say thank you, but he wore them again and again. One day, as they sat in silence on opposite ends of her porch, watching the snow melt into trickles beneath the pines, he spoke. "You're stronger than you look," he said, not quite looking at her. "I've had to be," she replied. His hand twitched at his side. "Ain't right what Calder did." She said nothing. There was no value in rehearsing that wound. But he added quietly, "You deserved better." Her throat tightened. Not from pain, but from the way his words fit so gently into the quiet, like they'd been waiting to land there. Spring came slow and hesitant, like a child peeking from behind a curtain. The snow receded in patches. Birds returned. Naomi planted herbs behind the cabin and built a second shelf for drying root. The town began to greet her with nods, small smiles. Her name was spoken now, not whispered. One morning, she found a small bouquet of wild violets resting on her doorstep. No note. Just flowers. Freshly picked. She pressed them between pages of one of the books he'd brought. When Naomi next rode into town, someone asked her, half serious, "When's your fella coming by again?" She blinked. "Who?" The woman smiled knowingly. "Mr. Quinn. He's been quieter than usual." Which says a lot. Naomi didn't answer. She only tugged her shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned toward home, her cheeks warm despite the chill. Back at the cabin, she laid out supper for two. Just in case. There was a knock at the door just after dusk. And though he said only, "evening," when he stepped inside, she knew something had changed. She poured him tea, and he handed her a hand-carved spoon. The handle was etched with vines. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. "It's beautiful." His gaze held hers. "You make things beautiful too." She looked down, but only for a moment. That night, as he sat near the fire and she mended the hem of her only good dress, she realized the silence between them had become a comfort. No longer empty. No longer cold. Something was growing. Not quickly. Not loudly. But surely. The rhythm of their days changed, though no one could say exactly when. Matthew began arriving not just with eggs or books but with questions. Small, thoughtful ones. What she liked in her bread. Whether her apple pie used cloves. If she'd ever seen the ocean. Naomi answered with care, offering a little more each time, not out of obligation, but because she wanted him to know her. He listened the way others didn't, like her words mattered, like they weren't just sounds in the air but truths to carry. She noticed how he never interrupted. How his eyes never drifted elsewhere when she spoke. Their exchanges remained simple. He'd fix a loose hinge while she kneaded dough. She'd patch his gloves while he sharpened tools. They shared stories over chipped mugs of chicory coffee, sitting close enough to feel the warmth of each other without ever brushing shoulders. There was something sacred in that space between them, not empty, but filled with understanding. One afternoon, Matthew brought a leather-bound book of poems. The corners were worn, the binding fragile. He held it like something valuable, like it had been passed through careful hand. "I thought maybe," he started, then cleared his throat. "You might read this. If you wanted." She took it gently, running her fingers over the gold-stamped title. "It's beautiful. I don't understand half of it," he confessed with a shy smile. "But some lines stuck with me." "Which ones?" He paused. "Even in winter, the seed remembers spring." Naomi pressed her lips together, the words settling into her like snow into earth, quiet, inevitable. "Thank you," she whispered. She read from it the next morning, her breath fogging the air inside the cabin, a shawl around her shoulders. The words felt like company. Weeks turned into months. Spring softened the land, and Naomi's hands grew calloused from garden work, But her heart softened, too. Matthew's visits became routine, never declared, but always welcome. He arrived with onions or flour, helped mend fences, carried water, or just sat by the fire with her while the sun dipped low behind the hills. They never labeled what they were building. That was part of its beauty. One evening, a storm blew in sudden and hard. The sky split open, and the roof groaned under the weight of wind and water. Naomi had just begun sealing the windows when a knock shook the door. Matthew stood there, soaked to the bone, his coat clutched in one hand. "Didn't want you alone in this," he said simply. She stepped aside, letting him in. They moved wordlessly around each other, lighting lamps, boiling water for tea. The storm raged while they sat close, their shoulders finally brushing. Neither moved. As thunder cracked overhead, Naomi turned toward him. "You never asked me to explain." "Didn't need to," he said. "Saw what I needed to." "And what's that?" "That you stayed." He didn't reach for her hand. But she placed hers beside his, close enough to feel the heat of his skin. The moment held. Later, when the rain eased into a quiet patter, he helped her bank the fire. He pulled a blanket from the shelf and spread it beside the hearth. "You'll stay?" she asked softly. "If you'll have me." She nodded. He didn't climb into her bed that night. He slept near the fire, boots off, his breath slow and steady. She watched him from her cot, heart too full to rest. Their closeness didn't rush into passion. It unfolded like a quilt stitched by careful hands, patch by patch, day by day. He brought her a spool of lace thread, and she wove it into a table runner. She cooked him sweet cornbread, and he left a bouquet of prairie roses wrapped in a red bandana. They exchanged no promises, yet each gesture built toward something stronger than words. One Sunday, Naomi baked 4 pies and brought them to the church social. The gathering took place in a wide barn with wildflowers in glass jars and laughter rising toward the rafters. She hadn't been back since the gossip chased her away. This time, when she entered with a basket on her arm, the room quieted, then shifted. Children ran up to her. A woman asked for her crust recipe. A young boy offered to carry her basket. And Matthew, already standing near the back, met her eyes with a nod that said, "I see you." They didn't dance. They stood by the wall, watching others sway and spin. But the space between them was gone now. He touched her hand once, just a brush of fingers. She leaned into it. As the sun dipped and shadows lengthened across the grass, Matthew asked, "Do you think about leaving?" She shook her head. "I thought about it every day. Until you." He didn't answer, only took her hand fully in his. That night, he walked her home. The path glowed silver with moonlight. When they reached the porch, he paused. "Naomi," he said, voice low and careful. "What we have, it's yours as much as mine. If you want it, if it's enough." She stepped closer. "It's more than I hoped for." He didn't kiss her then. Not yet. Just placed a hand over hers, letting the promise settle between them like the hush before dawn. In the days that followed, they shared more: chores, laughter, silence. Matthew brought her mother's old quilt to mend. She brought him plum jam. He fixed the latch on her door. She mended a rip in his coat. Love, in their world, wasn't spoken loudly. It was pie cooled on a windowsill. A clean shirt laid neatly over a chair. A fire already burning when the other walked through the door. One morning, Naomi opened her door to find a carved wooden box on the stoop. Inside were small things: a dried violet from spring, a strip of lace, a page from the poetry book, and a note. Even in winter, the seed remembers spring. She held the box to her chest and exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the day Henry vanished. That evening, as the first golden leaves began to fall across the hills, Naomi and Matthew sat on the porch. She leaned against him, head on his shoulder. "You ever think we were meant to meet?" she asked. He ran a finger along the back of her hand. "No," he said. "I think we chose to see each other." She smiled. That night they watched the stars in silence. And in that stillness, nothing else needed to be said. The morning of the autumn gathering came crisp and golden, the sky painted a soft blue with high, drifting clouds. Naomi stood before her small mirror, fastening the brooch her mother had once worn to church, an oval of polished garnet encased in brass. Her hands trembled slightly. It had been years since she stood in front of a crowd with her head high, not because she'd been forbidden, but because she hadn't dared. But this day felt different. Outside, the land shimmered in that peculiar way just before winter settles, sunlight mellow, shadows long. The town's meeting barn sat at the edge of a wide field dusted with frost, its roof crowned in amber leaves. Wagons lined up like prayer benches, children running wild between them, laughter on the wind. Naomi walked with slow purpose, basket in hand. Inside were cranberry scones wrapped in linen and a jar of apple butter tied with ribbon. She passed familiar faces, some that had once turned from her in coldness, others who nodded now, hesitant but warmer than before. She acknowledged each with quiet grace, never letting her shoulders drop. Inside the barn, oil lamps glowed along the beams, music curling from a fiddle at the far end. There were pies, cider, roasted squash, and fresh bread. Long tables stretched across the room, conversation rising and falling like a tide. Naomi made her way to the food table and placed her basket down, arranging the scones with care. Then she stepped back, unsure where to stand. Matthew spotted her from across the barn. He excused himself from a small knot of men and crossed the floor without pause. His coat was brushed clean, hair combed back, and he wore a shirt she'd mended with blue thread. He said nothing as he reached her, he only held out his hand. She placed hers in it, and together, they moved toward the center of the room. The music swelled into a slower waltz. Some faces turned toward them, curious, surprised, but no one whispered. Not this time. There were no narrowed glances, no folded arms. Just townsfolk watching something they hadn't dared imagine. Naomi Elridge, the woman they'd once bound with gossip and fear, now dancing with the quietest man in town. Matthew's palm was warm at her waist, his steps steady. She followed without faltering, the lace hem of her dress brushing the worn floorboards. Around them, the world softened. She wasn't afraid anymore of being seen. "You look like spring in the middle of fall," he murmured. Her throat tightened. "I never thought I'd come back here. You never left. You were just waiting for them to see you." They danced 2 songs before stepping aside. Children darted between them, chasing ribbons and crumbs. Naomi laughed, really laughed, and Matthew leaned down as if to memorize the sound. Later, the pastor's wife, Clara Tompkins, approached with a linen-wrapped parcel. "I thought these might suit your table," she said, offering it. "They're honey rolls. My mother's recipe." Naomi accepted the gift, surprised. "Thank you." Clara hesitated. "You've held your head high through a hard season. I think some of us owe you an apology." Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked across the barn, at the old men sipping cider, the girls threading leaves into each other's braids, the young mother bouncing a baby on her hip. "No one owes me," she said finally. "But I'm glad you're here." And that was enough. As the sun set, folks gathered on the porch, the barn lit from within like a lantern. The pastor gave thanks, a young couple announced their engagement, and then Matthew stepped forward. The crowd fell into expectant quiet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer a speech. He just turned to Naomi and took both her hands. "I don't have much," he said, "and I won't promise you an easy life. But I will never leave you wondering if you're alone. I've watched you carry a world that tried to bury you. And I've loved every step you've taken to stay standing." A hush settled so deep, even the wind held its breath. Then, in front of everyone who once doubted her, Matthew knelt on one knee and pulled a simple silver ring from his coat pocket. Naomi pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, not from sorrow, but from the fullness of being seen. She didn't need to look around. She only saw him. "Yes," she said, voice steady. "Yes." The barn erupted in gentle applause, some wiping tears, others smiling shyly. Matthew rose and kissed her, not fiercely, not for show, but with reverence. A kiss that said, "I have waited, and I will wait no more." As the night deepened, Naomi stood on the porch beside him, stars scattering across the dark sky. Lanterns flickered behind them, and laughter drifted like smoke into the cold. The town didn't whisper anymore. They greeted her now, not because they'd forgotten what they did, but because they finally remembered who she was. A woman who had survived the storm. A woman who loved without shame. A woman who had once been tied to a tree, not just by ropes, but by fear, by silence, by the cruelties of others. But she was free now. And you, dear reader, who've walked her path in these pages, remember what she overcame. When the world turns cold, when it tries to bind you in shadows and shame, think of Naomi Elridge standing tall in her frost-kissed dress, smiling beneath the stars. So if you are ever left in the quiet, called too much, or looked at like you don't belong, remember her. Remember how dignity grows best in soil others called barren. And know this: some roots survive the frost. Some hearts mend in silence. And sometimes, the quietest love is the one that saves you.